Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who want to define their own path. I'm your host, Kristen Rocco, and here I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Joining me today, I'm so lucky to have Julie Stoltman on the show. She's the founder of Reframe Career and Leadership. As a career coach and facilitator, she supports mid-career professionals in clarifying what meaningful work means for their lives. Through one-on-one and group coaching, Julie creates guided spaces for professionals to ask powerful questions that help illuminate their values and the impact they want to have. Julie has such a diverse background. She's been in the public sector, social entrepreneurship, and organizational development. She's got bold move of her own that she's going to talk all about on the podcast today, but she's also going to bring expert insight to help anybody who is pursuing a career transition think about their next step. There's so much wrapped up in career transition, right? And there's the emotional piece. There's the fact that you just have to take steps forward, but sometimes those steps forward are unclear, especially if you want to go into a new path. And Julie is here with me to talk about it all. So, Julie, I am really glad you're here. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Kristen. I'm so glad we're doing this.
Me too. And I love this topic. My audience is making bold moves. They're ready to pursue their dreams and also find meaningful and fulfilling work. And I've done a little bit of research to kick us off today about what's going on in the workplace. What's the state of the workplace like? And I found that in 2024, people are still not all that engaged in their work. And unfortunately, they also don't get the support they need to grow their careers in many cases. There's a Gallup study, it's the State of the Global Workplace report, that found that 62% of workers are not engaged and 15% are actively disengaged in their roles. That makes up 77% of workers who are not fulfilled. And then the study by Into and Workplace Intelligence, and it interviewed 1,600 full-time workers about the opportunities and tools at their disposal to promote their career growth. Mm-hmm. Almost half say their manager doesn't know how to help them with their career development. And 59% said their career rarely or never helps them explore opportunities for growth outside of their current department. I know people are proactive about their careers, their professional lives. They want to find work that fulfills them and that aligns with their values, but they're not getting the help they need. So thankfully, you are here today, Julie. Before we dive into all of this great guidance you're going to help us with today, I wanted to learn more about your journey. What ways did you begin experimenting with your own career change? And then how you made it to career coaching, which was obviously through some pivots of your own.
I realized that my bold moves all were spurred from saying yes or being pushed sometimes without the security of having a full-time job. When I think about my career and how I'm doing this work, is I moved to the UK after college for graduate school, and I decided to stay. I only had a temporary job, but it was with this amazing member of parliament. She's the longest serving female member of parliament, and she wasn't promising me full-time employment, but her office was saying, hey, we're going to be totally busy. She was going to run to be deputy leader of the Labour Party, which she eventually won. But I, in essence, had to say yes to this great opportunity that had no job security. And I was able to stay on and work for her and then get to go into the job field that I absolutely loved, which was public policy, specifically working on women's economic advancement, because that was like my academic background was gender studies and political science, and, you know, identified as a feminist long before it was cool or trending. So that was a total dream job, and I probably would have still be there to this day, but I moved without being a citizen of the UK. I couldn't stay. And so it took me in lots of different directions, and came to Seattle and had no connections. I took a temp job. Like, this was true insecurity. Taking this temp job in community mental health, where I went from being in the halls of Parliament to Seattle as folks were coming in crisis and having to assess and do intakes and get them to the care that they needed. And that, I think, was a good example of how I couldn't have planned for or predicted either of those pieces, but they were within a few years of each other. I'll also share, sometimes it turned out well, like in those instances, and other times think back on when I was in a really difficult spot and had to make this really tough decision of quitting my job, my stable job where I had good friends and great coworkers and a solid reputation, because I was in so much pain from health issues and struggling with infertility. And I had to do this thing that challenged every internal script that I grew up with or had, which is quitting a job without having another one. And looking back at it, I can say that was a bold move, but at the time that felt incredibly vulnerable.
How did you get from moving to Seattle to your career now in career coaching?
So I moved to Seattle, leaving a job where I had senior policy analyst as my title, and I strolled in and assumed I would be able to get a city job at the city of Seattle or somewhere in a local government capacity. And there I was, not being able to get even an interview for job titles that were even more junior than the one I had left. And I was completely confused, and it brought about a little bit of a crisis of confidence. And I think that was one of the pieces, the personal experience that I hold with me as I do coaching. I made the transition to taking a temp job, meeting people in the region, and then I found myself having to move into social entrepreneurship. It was like completely nowhere where I thought I would be. I'd been working for elected officials. I'd made my way back into government at that point, and I ended up being on the warehouse floor of a giant corporation in a packing facility, and I was in the reflective vest and trying to coach people in how you were sorting and packages. And that was just so different from anything I'd ever experienced. And from learning about myself and what I liked, which was building these programs and coaching people. So that was my first experience really coaching people in a completely different capacity than what I do now. But it gave me that insight, and I transitioned into the field of organizational development. So I was in the room with these CEOs and executive teams and boards, and they were getting so much investment, right? They had executive coach, and we were doing these big strategic planning efforts, and people were talking about millennials. Oh, they're not invested. They're not, they're just, how do we get in touch with them? And meanwhile, I, as a millennial, was in the break room with these folks, having these conversations. And like you said, I saw the passion and the desire for people to be doing meaningful work, but there was that disconnect. And so that was the first spark where I thought, well, hey, why is there so much investment when people are at these senior levels of their career and have already gotten the titles? What about folks who are actually trying to figure it out and actively do want to be able to grow? Where is the investment there? So that is kind of the initial steps. And then the I guess the leap I took was I built a workshop, and I still very clearly remember writing an email out to friends kind of saying, hey, I'm doing this thing. I don't know if it's going to be of value, but like, I'd love you to join me. And that was kind of the launch of Reframe. And it didn't form into a company for a few years, but I learned so much. And that leap was where it started.
You just shared exactly what I mentioned through statistics earlier in this conversation, which is these people who are at the highest senior level, they're getting investment in how to grow their careers. But mid-level, junior level people are not getting that level of investment from their corporations. And so they need to seek outside support and counsel. And I suppose that's why the space of career coaching has taken off, because people do need these resources from people who understand the specifics around making pivots from one thing to another. Speaking of which, I want to dissect a little bit more in your story because you kind of glossed over this, but I know it's a question from our audience. And just to let everybody know, I knew this was going to be a hot topic. So I wanted to see what questions our community was going to have around career transitions, career pivots, finding your next bold move. And so I got a lot of feedback from LinkedIn and Facebook. And I appreciate everybody who was able to be so vulnerable, first of all, in asking your question. I know sometimes that can feel very vulnerable to put yourself out there. But I want you to know that we're going to answer those questions today, specifically from you. So one of the questions, Julie, is really around transferable skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your personal experience is really great to not only share your expertise in this area of helping so many people, but you have a personal story as well. You've pivoted from
Mm-hmm.
what was it, public sector to organizational leadership. So what can you share about transferable skills? If you want to change directions, how can someone prove their skills are
Mm-hmm.
transferable in either a resume, portfolio, or interview situation?
Yeah, fantastic question. Super timely. I will say that one of the top things I'm hearing from folks I talk about, the reframe I'm getting is, how do I translate my skill set? Just that
Mm-hmm,
seems to be
mm-hmm.
a need that's out there.
Yes.
The first thing I would say to that person who raised the question is, unfortunately, you can't prove it, because unfortunately, we exist in systems that we don't have influence and control over. So that's not to say there isn't work to be done, but if we can kind of shift our mindset away from trying to create some kind of certainty that isn't out there, because I want folks to be able to manage their expectations. That's one of kind of my core
Mm-hmm.
principles. What I will say though is that you have to be able to be crystal clear about what it is you've done and what it is you want to do more of. And so I say this because I'll often work with folks on a verbal resume review. And really, what that is that someone will say, hey, I want to make a change and I don't know how to represent that on my resume. And so I will go through and ask questions about the job experiences people have had and the other relevant experience and the skill sets. And it's really amazing because people don't often see what these huge assets and strengths and unique experiences they have
Yes.
that should be at the forefront. Like I'm sure you've experienced that. And so I think there's so much power that comes when someone else is listening to you talk and then pulling out and asking you to go a little bit deeper. Tell me more about this. Because as humans, we're naturally filtering and we also know about ourselves. So some of the things that I want to pull out are things that might just be like, oh, yeah, of course I did that. Like, yeah, it's no big deal.
Yes, I can relate to this on so many different levels. And to take that one step further, Julie, I think this is the value of the space that you're in, career coaching, because you then get that one-on-one personal support to help you see the things that you don't see that will
Mhm.
build your confidence. And, I'm a storyteller and I've spent years interviewing experts, entrepreneurs at all levels, companies. And I even started a love storytelling business where I interviewed engaged couples. And I can attest to what you're saying, which is everybody just rolls through their experience in a very linear format.
Yep.
And to take it back to the love storytelling, it's like, this is where we met. This is how we met. These are some of the defining moments. This is when we got engaged. And they see it as very black and white, very matter of a fact. But when I see it and they're telling it to me, I find the coincidences,
Hmm.
I find the gems, I find the unique points, the serendipity moments that they don't see for themselves. And oftentimes people will say, oh my gosh, I never realized that before. And I'm sure, Julie, in the career coaching setting, when you're talking to people and having them outline their resume to you, it's very similar. Like, well, wait a minute, let's look at it this way.
Yeah. And it's also I think there's an element of permission there. We're so used to that script and we're so used to staying tied to what our job title was and what we did that it's harder to
Yeah.
get up on the balcony, as I say, and well, what are the outcomes that you delivered? And also, everything you've done in your career is not going to fit on your one-page resume. So you do get to
Mm,
choose and have some autonomy in what parts of your story you want to highlight and tell. And whether or not you've held a job title, if you have done the specific task or deliver the outcome that you want in the next role, then you have to be able to tell that story. And sometimes I
mm,
find that folks hold back, and that's where coaching can move beyond the initial, I've got
yeah.
imposter syndrome, I need more confidence,
Mm,
and we can go a little bit deeper and figure out like
mhm.
what's at the root there.
Okay, so going back to your personal story of making it one of your transitions on your own, how did you apply a skill set from one area to another to get that job? I would be so curious to know. Is there anything helpful that we can take away from your personal journey?
Yes. Okay. So one thing I did was when I had moved to Seattle and I was again totally frustrated trying to figure out what to do, I finally just threw up
Yeah.
my hands and asked a friend who was a local, and she said, "Well, you can't just apply to jobs in Seattle without, what have you done in Seattle? People really care about that." And so that spurred me on to say, okay, I need to talk to all the people who are doing cool political or government stuff in this region and just get to know them, get to know where things are moving, where there's interesting work that's happening, what initiatives are coming up that there are going to be short term roles that I could go into. So it was really a question of getting outside of my mindset of, okay, I have
Mm,
this on my resume, so I apply to this job that is online and then I put it away. It's like, actually, I got to do the work to meet people and learn what's going on. And then
mm,
I'm able to say with more certainty, because that's a lot of what my work is supporting people to move from saying, hey, I can do lots of things to, hey, this is what I do really well. This is what I want to do more of. And this is the type of role I'm going after. And that was kind of my first experience of narrowing down all the different things that I could do and being able to say, this is what I want to be able to do more of. This is who I want to serve.
I think that is so helpful, Julie. If you think in titles, it gets really tough to
Mm-hmm.
transfer from one to another. But if you think in capabilities or strengths or alignment, I think maybe it becomes a little bit easier to make transitions in your role. Okay, so I want to back up for a quick second and talk more specifically about what's unique about mid-career professionals that you felt compelled to make this audience your focus for career coaching, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody needs career coaching
Mm-hmm.
at some point in their lives, right? It's not just mid-career professionals. So what is it about this group of people that you feel more compelled to help?
Yeah. And so, firstly, I'll say earlier when I was sharing about being in the room and hearing the kind of gripes about millennials, that was what initially spurred me on because I said, you know what? Public sector is facing this massive demographic shift in the future. We've got to be able to get focus in on the folks who are coming in next. I will say, Kristen, I loved your podcast episode talking about midlife crisis and how there
Yeah.
needs to be this reframe. And that really makes me think about the opportunities at midlife. Like that is the spin that I want to be able to put at it. So
Mm,
first of all, mid-career is like this wide gap, and I define it as
yeah.
anyone who's 10 to 12 years into their career all the way up to 10 years out from retirement. So it's this huge swathe of people. And what's really interesting for me is that you have worked long enough to know what you do and don't like and what you want more and less of. Even if you haven't paused to like pull that out, you actually do have that knowledge. The second thing is that at mid career, you know a lot more about yourself. So you know what you need to maintain your own mental health and physical health and emotional well being. And with the right perspective and pause and guidance, you can figure out whether your current career is aligned with what you need or not. And then the third reason I would say I love mid career folks is that you have seen, like folks who are mid-career have been in different jobs. They have older coworkers or family members or friends who have gone through these different pieces. And you actually get to kind of make sense and use the information and the perspectives from the people in your lives and pull that together. And I think it's such a rich opportunity.
I couldn't agree more. And, I'm in my mid career and I just totally have had those experiences where I've had enough perspective to be like, okay, I've gained some expertise in an area, but then also looking further out to be like, to just question a little bit more like,
Mhm.
am I on the right track? Do I want to be doing this type of work or working in this type of way for the rest of my career or for the foreseeable future? I think you start to more question your values when you get into your mid career. You start to kind of take stock of your life and am I putting my career in the right place in my life or is it overwhelming my life? I think these are some of the questions that you bump up against when you're mid-career versus early on in your career. Like, I don't know about you, Julie, but I was a super ambitious person and I
Mhm.
would work all the time. I was like just trying to make a name for myself.
Yep.
Achievement meant a lot to me. But there is that point in time where you're like, what's the purpose of all of this? And I think that's when like the
100%.
gears start turning.
100%. And you also get to that point of if you are a high achiever and you've been used to going, 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 that's your default. But is it actually serving what you want your life to be? Because your career, I believe very strongly that our careers are a source of power in our lives and autonomy. And so we need to be able to have careers that support the lives that we want to lead. And at mid career, you have a much better sense of what life you're currently leading, what things you might want to change, and where you want to be going.
I think it's really interesting to think about it from this frame, which is like, what are some misleading messages we get about our careers up until this point in time?
Oh, yes. Okay, so misleading messages. So the first one I would say relates to the research you pulled on, hey, people are quietly quitting, people are disengaging at work. And we haven't adjusted to the fact that the nature of work has changed. Our parents'
Mhm.
generation may have gotten one, maybe two jobs and stayed within those jobs for their entire careers. That just isn't the case anymore. But the problem is that organizations have not shifted to figuring out how to consistently and sustainably invest in their people. And we see that really tangibly in professional development and learning and training budgets that are increasingly going down. So you've got people moving around more,
Interesting.
making changes, and the actual investment from your employers not at the same level. And I think it is a real change in mindset that we're okay with investing for our education, our formal education, or we're okay with investing for things where we need to do a fitness class to keep our, health and wellness up. But
Yes.
actually investing in your career, the thing that ultimately provides you health insurance most of the time and the money you need to live your life, there isn't that same default of investing in ourselves in terms of
Right.
that career focus. So I think that's a structural challenge that we're facing.
Yeah. I never thought about that before. I mean, I when I myself invested in career coaching, I had to get over that hill myself about,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, this feels like a insurmountable amount of money that I'll be putting in just working with somebody to help me figure out why I'm stuck and how to get unstuck and then what do I want to do. And it felt intimidating to
Mhm.
invest that amount of money in myself. I hadn't thought about it in the way that you framed it about we invest in all of these other different areas of our life and yet somehow we feel, you know, held back from investing in our professional lives. So it is definitely a mindset shift that people have to go through in order to be like, yeah, this totally makes sense. If I want to like get on to my next bold move in a way that's
Mhm.
going to be fulfilling and I'm going to write my story, maybe I have to make some investment there.
Yeah, and there's a real gender dynamic there too, because so often I will have women coming to me saying, hey, I don't know if I need to go back to school or take this expensive course. And without even considering, hey, maybe there's a lower cost, less time intensive investment that can help me figure out what I actually need to get to that other place. So now that's
Yeah.
another piece that I think is really important to bring that awareness that we often, especially women, think we need something on paper, where actually if we can invest in coaching, you're investing in getting back to your own inner wisdom and sense of possibility. And that is something that can radiate throughout your entire life.
That is priceless. Now, myself being on the other side of having all of that knowledge, that inner knowing, more familiarity with myself, I realize that that's the anchor for all of the decisions that I make.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I have those tools, I circle back to it and when I have another decision to make to help guide me. So it really is priceless. When I was doing my background research for our call today, you shared a blog post with me that was about the story you're telling yourself, and I found that really intriguing. And I just wanted to read a snippet from this, and then I'm going to ask a question related. But you shared a story about somebody you had encountered, and they were asking you questions about career transition. And this is the essence of that story. She says, I worked in hospitals for a while, then got burnt out, and I moved cities. I did this other job, insurance, and liked it until I got pregnant and decided to take a safer job. I stayed in that job while I also started a small business with a friend, but had to wind it down because of the pandemic. Now I'm worried that my resume looks like I'm all over the place and that I failed in keeping a job. And then you told her how you experienced her story from the outside perspective. And you wrote, in terms of how you would reshape what she said, I have a passion for kids having access to quality mental health. So I worked in a really well renowned hospital system supporting kids as they got access to care. After a few years, I felt burnt out from the intensity of the role and the intensity of the city I lived in. I got entrepreneurial. I studied and got certifications so I could sell insurance. I learned a new industry and enjoyed it. When I got pregnant, the idea of working in a role that relied on commissions made me feel nervous. So I found a role that seemed to combine these things I care about. And it kind of goes on from there. But what I felt was really interesting about that is people are so self critical
Mm-hmm.
and they have a lot of self doubt. And because they have to make all of these different moves to align with various different situations and circumstances in their lives, they somehow think that's negative impact on their professional lives. The question I wanted to ask was, why is it so important to recognize the story you're telling yourself?
It's so critical because there are so many other stories that you could tell. And one thing I want to share is the power of going through this type of transition point or this kind of crisis of confidence point. If you are doing it by yourself, you feel alone. It compounds the sense that you haven't figured it out. You don't have enough experience. You can't tell your story the way it needs to be told. When you do it with other people who are having those same thoughts, you will walk away. The aha that always comes out of the very first session of any group I have together is, oh my gosh, I didn't know wasn't the only one. And you
Mm,
can feel, Kristen, like, when you're on a call or in person, the
yeah.
sense in the room of this deep relief. And it's so simple. That's like what, 2 hours in a small group, and people's level of confidence shifts. And they then can see their story in a different light, partially because they have that different sense, but also because the people in the room are seeing things in them
Yeah.
that weren't
Yeah.
able to see. It is incredibly important to get a different perspective on sometimes what we
Yeah.
think of as our like one-page resume that we are sick and tired of, or our LinkedIn bio.
Something that somebody could do tomorrow that's facing feelings of stuck and a lack of confidence and how to get that next opportunity or wanting to pivot to a completely different role. I think somebody tomorrow could ask their friend to sit with them for 30 minutes
Mm-hmm.
and help mirror back what they're hearing about their experiences in their resume to do that. Some of those aha moments that they might not be seeing for themselves. And that might help open up additional ways to think about approaching their career search, their career transition. I think that's something that anybody could do tomorrow. I want to transition into some more listener questions. So we already talked about transferable skills, and I've got some other really, really good ones, which I guess this is kind of along the lines of transferable skills. She asked, what's your best advice from going to a contract position to a more permanent position? Or another way to think about it is going from entrepreneurship to working for a corporation.
Yeah, that's a great question. As someone who has made several transitions from contract work to permanent work, I'm well versed in this. The first thing I would say is it's all about relationships with people. So I managed to find myself as an American in the House of Commons working there because I just reached out to my former manager and had stayed in touch and had been the one who always showed up when there were volunteer opportunities. And so she trusted that I would show up and we worked well together. And so I would say that making the move from contract to permanent, you want to just be aware of the relationships with people that you're working with, as well as stakeholders, as well as the person who directly has those hiring opportunities. The second thing I would say is that we often, on our resumes or just in how we think about things, we keep track of what we did in a job when really we need to be jumping up one step higher on the balcony and thinking about the outcomes that resulted because of the work that we did. And so I think, especially when you're moving and you're hoping to move into permanent work, being able to be really clear, not just, I did all the tasks that were set out, but hey, here's what changed as a result. Here are the transformations that actually happened. And most importantly, like, this is why I want to keep doing this. So demonstrating your value is another key piece that I would say is often hard, again, when you have that insecurity built in or baked into where you are. It's reminding folks that there's a lot of value in having that continuity.
I heard that 85% of roles are filled through networking. I heard that on another podcast, so I can't validate the source of it. But let's just say that so many positions right now in corporate America are filled through relationship building, through relationships you have, through networking. And that goes to your first point, Julie, which is if you're trying to make a transition and you don't know how, stop thinking about how and start thinking about who.
Absolutely.
Okay, the next question from a listener is, what should you prioritize when you're making a transition or exploring your next step? Learning new skills or networking when preparing for a career change?
If you are mid-career, you likely have tons of skills. And so going out there and just trying to take LinkedIn learning courses so you have those badges is not going to be the best use of your time. What I will say, and this is based in my personal experience as a coach working with predominantly women and the social science research, is that women are more likely to feel that they need more skills or to get qualifications, and they are more likely to feel that networking is scary. So, what I would say is that focusing on networking is going to give you a bigger value. Now, the challenge is you have to understand what is making you, if networking makes you feel nervous or you shy away from it, consciously or unconsciously. You have to kind of get under what is it about that is holding you back. Because what I will say is going out to a networking conference, let's say, and kind of standing in the room and maybe saying hello to the person next to you, which I have done on many occasions. So I am not an expert networker by any means, but that's not going to get you to the same place if you figure out, hey, what do I want to get out of going to this event? Who do I want to meet? what do I want to learn more about specifically? So I think the priority really needs to be about figuring out what you want to do more of, what you want to do less of, and who you want to learn from. And then going out and asking somebody, hey, I really want to learn this thing from you. And being specific and making it clear that you're there to respect people's time and pay
Yeah.
it forward in the future.
One thing I've done on that note, Julie, about going to conferences and being strategic about who I'm meeting there is before I attend an event, I'll actually go to the speaker list and I'll look at who's there. And I'll actually reach out on LinkedIn and I'll say something to the effect of, hey, I noticed that you're going to be speaking at this event. I'm so interested in learning from you. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, and I hope to meet you there. So before you get there, you've already introduced yourself so that when you're at the event, you're not coming in cold. Maybe you'll walk up to this person and be like, I so enjoyed listening to what you had to say about this. This was my top takeaway. And sometimes they'll even respond back to you on LinkedIn before you get there. And so they'll have an awareness of who you are. So you've established a connection before you even get to the event.
Totally. I love that. And the only thing I'd add is you can also, if you're someone who is more introverted and the idea of networking kind of makes you break out in hives, it's thinking about what feels authentic to you. If you break down what networking is, it's meeting other people, learning from them, and sometimes offering things that you could provide or sharing your own expertise, but just getting really clear about how you need to approach networking or making connections with people in a way that's going to feel authentic to you, because that's when you're going to show up at your best.
Yeah. Yep. I love that. Do it your way. Another guest of mine, Diana Murphy. That was her main piece of advice too. Just always do it the way that it feels most authentic to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Somebody else asked, how can you tell if it's time for a career shift or just a change in your current role?
Oh, I love that question. I will say, and this is part of what I believe, is that people need to be able to take a pause. And a pause is really just space to get quiet and reconnect with yourself. And I think that if that is a condition that is met, then oftentimes that question, which is a very, common thing that people run into, it's going to
Right.
become much clearer to you. And it may not even be an either or of like something new or stay where I am. It could be a combination, or it could be an option that you haven't seen before. I've definitely worked with folks where they've come out of a group experience, which is, 4 weeks long. It's not a significant chunk of time, but they realize I love these things about the work that I do, but I know that I want this type of organization for where I am right now. And so it is about making a shift, but it's not about changing everything. You're going to get so much more clarity if you can think beyond the binary of stay or do I go.
I'm sure that in the work that you do with your clients as well as your group coaching, you have tools and assessments and things like that to help people understand and clarify better about what they might need or what those shifts might look like for them. Can you talk broadly about some of the, other than journaling, which I think is super helpful for people to do too, what are some of the other tools and assessments or tips that you might have to get down to the answer of these deeper questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say for anyone that I'm starting work with, we start with a client intake, which is a pretty in-depth assessment of questions where it's relying on you reflecting on your upbringing, kind of roles in your life, key turning points, also how you learn and how you take in information. So that client intake form is a real useful tool. I'll also say that for a lot of folks, when I initially meet with them and they're kind of saying, "Oh, I'm not quite sure what it is I want to be doing more of," I'll have them start with an energy management assessment. And so that's a tool that I have that I'm happy to link in the show notes for anyone who's listening. But it's really about, hey, I'm going to track my time for 2 weeks, and I'm going to not just track what I'm doing, but I'm going to track where my energy is and what I'm doing that then is either giving me energy or taking energy away. And that's been a really powerful tool for folks. And in terms of other tools, really the group workshops that I do, it's a mix of, it's not lecture style, but it's a approach where there are exercises that we're going through, like, hey, what do I want my impact to be over my career, and how we have that conversation and learn from each other, and what things do I have right now versus what things that I need. So there are a lot of different tools that I'll use, and it's really based on where somebody is right now.
All right, y'all, you heard it. I'm going to link this resource for you in the show notes. So open up the show notes and go grab that link. I think that'll be another great quick start to getting you on the path of a transition. All right, I've got a hardball for you.
All right.
This next list is human hot, and I understand why. She's curious about how to overcome age discrimination when switching and interviewing. So she clarifies younger manager as your future supervisor.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, it's such a good question. So first thing I will say is you need to hear how people are also experiencing this. So I learn so much from clients that I have who are experiencing this. The two things that jump out at me are, one, really focusing on behavioral examples. So again, not just saying what you've done, like the tasks, but really how do you behave on the job? What are the outcomes that you've helped produce? So you're really wanting to get as brass tacks as you can. The second thing I'm thinking about is really to look at resources of organizations that have been doing this type of work and have people who have been facing this issue for a lot longer. And my head that's coming up is AARP and the work that they're doing to make sure that age discrimination is something that people are aware of, and the education is going on both at the organizational level and with folks who are interviewing and hiring, but also with individuals when you're coming up to each other.
These issues that come up in the workplace can be doozies, but there are resources. I love that you directed people to AARP. These people who have been there and confronted these things before can offer the advice maybe that can help us in our situations as well. Okay, a few final questions. How do you stay confident during a career pivot, especially if you're taking a step back to step forward?
That is really challenging. So, what I will say is don't go at it alone. What I have seen, it's really about being with other people in community as you're going through these changes. And that's what I have experienced when there are other people who are in it with you and can be your cheerleader, who can be your accountability partner, who can celebrate with you when things go well, who can jump on a call and say, hey, I'm also going to work on my resume for 25 minutes, like hit the timer and go.
Oh, yes.
So that's one of the big pieces, I would say. I'll also say that knowing what you want is a huge piece in terms of confidence. Even if you are not going to get that specific, role that you've got down to the, you figure out exactly what it is, the dream job. The fact that you've done the work to know what it is you want to go for and go towards, like, that is so powerful. And you exude that when you're telling people, and whether it's the barista or a friend you've bumped into, like, oh, what are you looking for? Oh, okay, so I know that I want to be in this field. I know that, like, this type of organization is really important to me. Like, these things matter, and I think that goes a long way to that kind of sustainable confidence, and knowing that you're not going to be positive and confident at every stage. Like, let me be clear, if I haven't already, like, making a career change or moving from a place of feeling stuck or bored or unchallenged to something more exciting or powerful, you will go through the river of discomfort. You will. And having that knowledge and kind of grounding in the fact that it doesn't have to mean anything about you if you're feeling that discomfort or distress, it's just part of the journey that we're on.
I'm so glad that we're being honest and authentic about how it really feels to go through a pretty pivotal moment in your life. And I think what we're talking about here, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, Julie, sometimes a career move is straightforward in that we're clear that the next step for us is the promotion,
Mhm.
is the next level of the title, right? That feels very clear. And okay, we just know that we need to put our resume out, we need to network with people in order to get to the next level. But I think what we're talking about here is when people are really having those existential questions
Mhm.
about what is it that I want to do? Like, I've been doing this thing, but now I'm bumping up against a question where it's like, maybe I don't want to do that thing anymore.
Mhm.
Or maybe I still want to do that thing, but I want to do that thing in a different way, but I'm not quite sure what that way is or if that way is possible. And so that's the journey, that's the discomfort, that's where the lack of confidence comes in. Sure, and I'm not trying to discount the fact that confidence is a factor in these other, getting any job is hard. I think my friend just told me she went through 7 interviews to get the job, right? Like it is never straightforward for any type of position.
Mhm.
And there's some um, times in your life where you're coming against those existential questions that are needing to also be answered while going through a career change, and that is where it's gets to be really isolating.
100%. And I think there is this perception, Kristen, that career coaching is for when you're either like really stuck, have been laid off, don't know what you're doing, or you're like, I'm ready for the promotion. How do I do it? But what I'll share is I increasingly see people who are coming because they have this inkling that there's something more out there. And it may not be even a different career, but it might be this rebalancing of, hey, I've been working really hard and putting a lot of eggs in that career basket, but I'm realizing that there are pieces of me, whether it's creativity or hobbies or caregiving, that actually I want to be able to do differently and without the level of stress that I've become used to. So I always want to say
Yes.
to folks, career coaching and coming to a group and doing this work, it doesn't mean you're coming from a place where you're feeling pushed into it. You can also be kind of pulled into it because you've had these feelings that, hey, I just want to check in and maybe rebalance things in my life.
I want to end on a high note. So, what do you think are the key factors for a successful career change?
Ooh, I love that question. Okay. Key factors. One is the pause, and that is sometimes just giving yourself permission to take a pause. And the pause does not have to be I'm quitting my job or I'm taking a sabbatical, but it's this intentional time and investment of your energy and resources that you are putting towards answering this question for yourself. So the pause is number one. The second piece is the self awareness that we've all been talking about. So, again, being comfortable with getting uncomfortable and being willing to learn more about yourself. The third piece I will say is community, and that is so important. And you and I met through a community of professional women, and so I know you know this too, but we don't go through life alone. We certainly don't go through our careers alone, what with clients and stakeholders and team members and bosses. There's no reason to try to go through a career change by yourself. And we can kind of reject the pulling yourself up by your bootstraps American kind of individualism and just know that
Yeah.
investing in yourself is going to pay so many dividends, and it's going to ripple out to the people you love and your community
Mm.
more broadly. And that's why I love the work that I do, because it's not just about the individual, it's about the change that it creates for people and like everything beyond what's in front of us.
Oh, that's so empowering. I'm so glad we left off there. What an empowering message. Julie, what do you know about being bold today you wish you would have known earlier on?
I wish I had known that being liked or pleasing everyone is not going to get what you want. I've definitely been coming around to this idea, which you probably know, Kristen, in marketing, where attract and repel. And the stronger you repel, the stronger you're also going to attract, right? The people who you are best placed to be able to serve. So I definitely wish I had known that. And the second thing I wish I had known is that becoming a parent doesn't mean that you lose your creative, interesting part of your life and you stop being able to do lots of different things, and that it's this like end of anything fun. Because I work with a ton of people who are parents. I'm a parent myself,
Yeah.
and I will say that becoming a parent was one of the reasons that spurred me to create this workshop, which was the start of the business. And it was because I realized I'm someone's mom. So I don't need to be intimidated by these people in the room that I'm in or these board conversations. Like, I'm somebody's parent, and it's time to act like I have this expertise and knowledge and to put it out there into the world.
Oh, so good. If people want to learn more about you, Julie, you've also got an upcoming workshop launching in October. So I want you to tell listeners all about what you've got going on in case they are ready. They are at that moment to say, I don't want to go at this alone anymore. I want some resources to help me get to my
Yeah,
my next bold move.
I love that. And I will say this workshop is called Your Next Career Move. It is the one I just talked about earlier on, where I kind of put it together in that really vulnerable place. But I've been holding it for over 5 years at this point. And what I will say is, you will get the time to pause. You will get the time and the support to clarify what matters, and you will get to do it in community with really thoughtful, wonderful people. I kick it off on Mondays because my belief is, if you love your job, you're not going to get the Sunday scaries. You're excited to go to work on Monday.
Yeah.
The group meets for 4 weeks in a row, and we go through a really clear curriculum, and it's a ton of fun. It's virtual, and it maxes out at 8 people, because my aim is to create a cohort environment so that people are learning from one another. You can be from any kind of professional background. You are learning so much more, and it's so much more fun when we've got,
Yes.
someone who's a UX designer and a public sector planner and a nonprofit exec. So if you are interested to learn more, I always have a call with someone before to make sure they're the right fit. And you can go to reframecareer.com and sign up for a discovery call or learn more.
All right. I will put that in the show notes. I want to thank you, Julie, for being here today and going through all of these really interesting, important, and critical listener questions with me today. I know it's going to help so many people make their next career bold move. And I really want to do a special shout out to all the listeners that submitted questions and helped this episode be as valuable, as informative to your actual needs as it possibly can be. So thank you for reaching out and submitting those questions so we could answer them on the podcast here today. Julie, thank you again for your time. I've really appreciated it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And Kristen, thanks for the work that you do. And this podcast is, I think, delivering so much value for people. So keep at it, and I'm cheering you on.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.